before I start talking about console, I have to start with how does console fit into the broader gaming ecosystem. And what you see on here is our market size forecasting revenues for the games market this year, which will make almost 197 billion, 196.8 to be exact. Still a bit of growth, 2.1% growth year on year is what we forecast for the year. And most of that growth is driven by the mobile segment, where we still see a bit of growth. Now, just go through some of the growth drivers per segment, and I promise afterwards I'll focus on console. Starting with the PC segment, which is most for the ease of saying so, it's a flat market this year, 0.03% year-on-year growth. Now, why is PC? And I think to put this into context, I do also have to mention our forecast for consoles. Actually, it's declining slightly year-on-year, minus 2.2%. And the reason why is mainly because of the release title slate. There are just less, especially in the AAA sphere, less games coming out, limited blockbuster releases. But the reason why PC is flat, console is slightly declining, is because console is much more reliant on those blockbuster releases for growth, whereas PC can look to a strong long tail of indie titles. There's less disruption to live service games with this whole release slowdown, and that drives PC gaming revenue. And in contrast, console, less reliant on live services, less reliant on free-to-play, and more reliant on premium sales still, and that's why there's the difference in growth. For both of these segments, however, there is an impact of the supply chain crisis, meaning it's harder to get hardware, whether that be new consoles, whether that be new PC gaming components. And if people can't get their hands on new hardware, they just tend to spend less on software as well. The saving grace this year is mobile gaming, dominant business model, free to play. It's easier to monetize in times of economic turmoil. The growth comes from emerging markets. Easier and shorter development cycles means there's less of an impact to the releases as compared to PC and console, and it's less of a hit-driven market. So some of these drivers that are tied to the slowdown on PC and console are not impacting mobile as much. But looking ahead, even though this year is not a great year for growth, we do predict very strong growth in the game cycle moving towards 2025. And a large part of that is driven by the console segment, so that's a good sign if you're into console. And now when I wanted to dive into console gaming, I wanted to first take a step back and look at the history of console gaming and kind of see how growth flows into console gaming. Because it's so tied to hardware releases, there's a very interesting pattern that you can sort of observe when it comes to consumer spending on console games. Now, be clear here, our definition for console games does not include the hardware sales itself. So when it goes to software sales or revenues generated by game software, kind of you see a cycle where, and I'll show it on the chart here, at this year, 2013, was when the last generation released, so PlayStation 4, Xbox One. And then for the first few years, you see a slight decline or a flat market for game software. That's because people are spending, take it, say, an average person has a couple of $100 or euros to spend on games per year, on console games. If they have to buy a 400 euro device, that leaves less for software. So we get that decline, and then we get a ramp up roughly 3-4 years after the launch. And then actually, for last generation, 2018, a lot of things came together, and that caused that peak. This was the Nintendo Switch, which outperformed expectations. This was the peak of the Battle Royale hype. So when PUBG was at its height, and Fortnite made the pivot into Battle Royale as well. But it's also 5 years after the launch of the console is roughly when you expect to see that peak in install base, meaning most of the budget that people spend on console goes to software. And then it should have tapered down. As you can see, 2019, it should have, under normal circumstances, be roughly flat in 2020 as well, but a pandemic happened, people were locked at home, and the one entertainment they had left to play was games. So a bit of an oddball year, 2021 as well, but after that you can see that we're sort of getting to that same cycle with the PlayStation 5 release, with the Xbox Series release, and we are predicting strong growth for console next year. Looking at the number of people that play games, we estimate that in 2022, these are numbers for 2022, roughly 3.2 billion people will play games. And that's a lot. But the vast majority of those people only play on mobile, 2.7 billion if you round it up. And the second largest group of players is PC players, which is a bit over 1 billion. And console players at the bottom, actually, it's only 600 million of those 3.2 billion. So when you see that big number, 3.2 billion, don't get misguided. If we're talking about console, it's a much smaller group. But again, there is a saving grace. If we look at the annual average revenue per paying user, then console blows mobile and PC out of the water. Almost 175, and I repeat again, this is just in game software. A lot to digest on this slide, but I'll give you the intro. The way we look at players is not just per platform, because we also look at why people play, what their motivations are, and how they fit on a scale of, to be a gamer, to be a game enthusiast, it goes beyond just playing. It includes viewing, it includes socializing, communicating. It also includes the enjoyment of owning games, owning game hardware. And if you look across all those metrics, all those axes, we've defined 9 groups of people that sort of fit, try to encompass all the ways people engage with game content. But what I wanted to call your attention to here is, out of those 600 million console players, they tend to skew, or they tend to group in what you would consider more core gamer personas, even more so than PC players, even though there's the stigma that PC players are the hardcore multiplayer PC players. If you look at, so what we define as the ultimate gamer, so these are people that say gaming is my DNA, it defines who I am. But also solo gamers, mainstream gamers, all-around enthusiasts, these are all people that tend to score very high on the identifying with gaming, finding gaming a very important hobby. And console players over-index in all of these groups. So just want to point out as well that, there's a lot of, even though it might be a smaller group of players, it's actually console where a lot of the more hardcore gamers tend to concentrate. So, as I promised, moving on from some of the market data, I wanted to talk about the trends that are shaping console right now and also that are shaping the next few years of console. And I'm going to highlight 3 today, and this is not all-encompassing. I'm sure there are more trends. Maybe we'll get some this afternoon. But these are the 3 that I wanted to talk about today. And I want to talk about, first, I'll talk about the importance of live service games and how it determines M&A strategy. Afterwards, I want to spend some time talking about cross-platform and even cross-media releases, and then finally ending on subscription services. Moving into live services first, what am I talking about here? Well, the growing importance of live services on console. And again, we look back to these years of console in the past, the growth chart that I showed a few slides before. Even the last generation, a lot of that was premium. And actually, in that 2018 jump in revenue, if you recall, and that being PUBG and that being Fortnite, arguably that was the moment where in-game spending or live services, recurring revenues, however you want to refer to them, really jumped on console. And I put that on the table here, and I hope it's readable, but in 2015, the share of the console market from in-game revenues was just under 15%. In 2018, so around that peak, that jumped up to 25%. This year, we forecast it to be almost 1/3 of the market, and by 2025, we forecast to be over 37% of the revenues generated on console coming from in-game spending. And we can see some of the incumbents, like the platform holders on console, are using this trend of live services also to open up their ecosystem. And again, the reason why they would be interested in doing so, mainly, recall from that player chart, 600 million people playing console, but there's 3.2 billion people in the world that play games. So naturally, you know, if you want to expand if you want to keep growing, if you want to expand your market, you're going to look at PC, you're going to look at console to find that. But to do so, the best way, you know, the biggest revenue generators on those platforms are actually live service games, not premium games. In fact, premium games are not really a thing at all on mobile, and only a small part of the market on PC. So they're diving headfirst into it, but it is also driving their M&A strategy. Because, you know, growing live services and growing them organically, it takes an incredible amount of time, it takes resources, it's a different way to develop, you need to organize differently for it. And because the nature of live services is to get people engaged, so it's about engagement, not about selling as much, the revenues come from engagement, there isn't as much room for multiple hundreds of live services to be successful, less so than it would be with premium. And therefore, you know, you need to get this right. There's not a whole lot of room for failure. So what are they doing? They're acquiring studios, not just for their content, but also for their talent, for their expertise. So PlayStation acquiring Bungie is not just to get the Destiny franchise, although that's a very nice franchise to have, but it's also to get the people that work at Bungie and the people that have that experience running Destiny as a live service. And the same with their acquisition of Savage Game Studios, which is a mobile studio that hasn't published a game yet, but the people working there, they know the free-to-play industry, they know the mobile industry. So through acquisition, they're bolstering their ranks, they're growing their talent, they're growing their resources to be successful in this live service market, to be successful in these different platforms. And Xbox are doing the same thing, but they have a bigger war chest, if you will. So they're growing both their in-house content portfolio, so the premium titles, where PlayStation is traditionally stronger, but also the ability and the talent to run successful live service games. But they're doing so with massive acquisitions, acquiring Bethesda, acquiring now, hopefully for them, acquiring Activision Blizzard. And I want to dive into that a bit more. I think this is a gaming audience, so I don't have to explain what a live service game is. But I want to show you some of our engagement data to kind of, you know, push the point about why it's so, why they're so interested in running live service games. So, and at first I want to dispel maybe if you know, a live service game does not mean free to play necessarily. And I wanted to highlight two models that have been successful on console when it comes to in-game spending. I want to show how that goes. So, a live service game, it does not imply anything really about monetization model other than there being some form of recurring revenue because you have ongoing continuous developing costs. So if you want to cover those continuous developing costs, then you need some form of recurring revenue. And other than the free-to-play model, which is like the Fortnite, League of Legends, which only really Fortnite's really big on console right now. There's two ones that I want to call it. Some of they call premium live service. So these are trying to get, you know, the best of both worlds. And then there's the hybrid model. So these are games that launched premium, but then went free to play. And what does that do? And what you see on the chart here is from December 2020 to August 2022, the month of active users for a variety of games. And Destiny, very steady, always somewhere between that 5 to 10 million players. And because they monetize, you know, there's an in-game store, you can buy cosmetics, you have DLC that you have to purchase. So again, it's not fully free to play. Their DLC you actually have to purchase. But you can start the game for free. There's plenty of options to spend in the game. And it's a very steady flow of players. So, you know, Sony acquiring Bungie, getting into Destiny IP, it basically guarantees them this group of players and also their spending habits. FIFA is another interesting example because FIFA, of course, it's a premium game. You have to buy the full game still. But then through its Ultimate Team mode, it monetizes like it would be a free-to-play game. And it also does content additions, seasonal content, like it were a free-to-play game. But what I want to particularly call out on FIFA, so dark green is FIFA 21. Obviously, FIFA 22 launches in September. Again, this was last year. Now we actually have FIFA 23. And it almost immediately captures somewhat of the same player base. And it just continues as it were. FIFA 21 capers off very quickly. But then, for the first time, April this year, they included it on Xbox Game Pass, and they included it as one of the free games of PlayStation Plus. And all of a sudden, you get this bump in active users. You go up from, between 10 to 15 million users to almost 20 million. And because it monetized free-to-play, because it pulls people into this Ultimate Team mode, that bumps up revenue as well. And then Fall Guys is the extreme example here, which after the Epic Games acquisition of Mediatonic, it went free-to-play roughly around the same time, a month later. I think it was in May. And for a brief moment there, it was the most played game in our data. Even more so than League of Legends, more so than Fortnite, more so than Roblox, Minecraft, etc. Fall Guys had its moment in the sun because it went free-to-play. Now, how does this work for premium games? And I highlight two examples here. Elden Ring, of course, being a massive release, but being pure play premium, if you will. So it launches, people buy the game, they finish it. It's a finite experience. There's maybe 100, 200 hours in it, but afterwards you're sort of done. There's no content additions planned, at least not yet. So it tapers off very quickly. And obviously, if you're looking at revenue as well, then the same cycle happens. And Hitman is quite interesting because it is a free-to-play or a premium game as well, but it does a lot with seasonal content, does a lot with DLC, and that's where you get some of these spikes in MAU. So around here, they would launch new content. Around here, they would launch new content. And then it keeps the player base actually very stable. You can see it doesn't taper off like an Elden Ring would. All right, moving on. Cross-platform releases, expanding beyond the borders of console, another trend that is shaping the console market right now. And like I said, there's multiple facets to this. So these are some examples that I wanted to call out of typical console franchises, arguably Diablo being a PC franchise as well, but that are making their way to other platforms to expand the addressable market. But these are still with different builds or with different versions of the game. So, the Crash Bandicoot franchise of Activision Blizzard, levering its franchise recognizability, but bringing it to mobile via a very different experience, Crash Bandicoot on the Run. And the same with Call of Duty, again, arguably the biggest franchise on console right now, brought to mobile by Tencent. But it's a different experience. This is actually the same experience, but I find it very interesting that after so long, PlayStation studios always develop exclusive games for PlayStation, but now even they have, PlayStation have made the move to go towards PC to expand the addressable market that way, and quite possibly in the future mobile as well, if the Savage Game Studios acquisition is anything to go by. There's still a little delay. It's not first day like Xbox would do, so they would launch on PC and console at the same time. PlayStation needs that first day revenue on PlayStation to make up their bottom line. And finally, Diablo Immortal, a very Diablo-like experience developed for the mobile segment with its controversies throughout the development, but still quite successful, actually, very successful, and especially in the Chinese market where arguably it was developed for. So this is let's say, the entryway into doing cross-platform, but there's more options here. I mean, fully cross-platform, cross-play is also getting more prominent, and this is really blurring that line between platforms. And, it's interesting that this isn't a trend that you would see PlayStation, embrace very quickly, because it's not really in their interest, nor would you see Nintendo. By the way, I realize that I'm not really talking about Nintendo here. There's a very clear reason for that, is that Nintendo doesn't follow trends. They do their own thing, and they get to do so. They have the brand to do so. So Nintendo is and will remain what they would call themselves, a toy company first. But anyway, back to crossplay. This is basically the next step in blurring those lines between platforms. And for an Epic Games, it doesn't matter whether you would play on PC, PlayStation, Xbox, Switch, mobile. Well, they probably prefer if you play to the Epic Games Store, but then we go into the economics of things. But as long as you're playing Fortnite, it doesn't matter what device you're using. Same for Genshin Impact, Among Us, Apex Legends. It's about growing your game. It's about growing your franchise. It's not necessarily about, there's no interest in growing the platform. And looking even beyond gaming, games are expanding ever more than ever into TV and film, and these are just 3 Sony IPs that I highlighted here that are in development, either to become a movie or to become a series. The Last of Us TV show is launching a couple of months from now, I think. And the trailers received a lot of hype, and likewise, Uncharted, Ghost of Tsushima. These are very narrative-driven games, perfectly adaptable for a big screen, for TV series. And this is just another way to get your franchise out there, to grow the franchise, to get interest in it. And how does that actually work? Well, I pulled up a recent example of what that actually means for your game engagement. This is the daily active users for Cyberpunk 2077 for the last month, roughly. And, solid daily active users up until the 13th of September. And then for those of you who didn't launch, a Netflix series, Cyberpunk Ghost Runner, launched that celebrated the franchise, was about the franchise, tied into the franchise. And you can see what happened from, roughly, can't read of the screen if I'm so close. So from roughly 300,000 daily active users, it jumped up to 900,000 today. So it's a non-game entertainment, it's a series, yet they tripled their daily active users in the span of a month. So that's why, very, very impressive. Last trend to speak about, subscription service, and more relevant how, the subscription service, the importance of first-party revenues. Again, you're looking at a Nintendo, Xbox, PlayStation. They want people to play within their ecosystem. And how people consume content right now is about subscription services, so they're jumping on that as well. But there's a different strategy to this, and this, again, ties back to the backing of the firms that own these different companies. An important part of this mix to expand gaming season, to expand the addressable market, to expand the market for console are these subscription services. But the way that Xbox can go around about it versus PlayStation, Nintendo, or EA, Ubisoft is very different. And that is because, for Microsoft, they don't need, they can take a loss for a while. They're such a big company that they can invest in growing their subscription service, and once it's big enough, get the necessary amount of users to make that profitable. But a PlayStation and Nintendo, they need that first-day revenue. They need their title revenue, and the same goes for a pure-play publisher like EA, like Ubisoft. They need those game sales in order to meet their bottom line, to be profitable. So I don't suspect that we'll see first-day launches for any of these games, particularly for PlayStation and mobile, on their subscription services in the short run. But what is interesting as well is the bundling of services, of course. EA Play now being available through Game Pass and also through PlayStation Plus. It kind of shows, the lines are blurring here. And actually, what's also interesting, so what I put on the table on the right here is the share of console subscriptions of that total pie of games market, the 197 billion I showed right at the start of this presentation. It is growing. What that means is the actual subscription revenue is outgrowing the overall growth of the market. And quite impressively so as well. I mean, I know 5% of the total market doesn't sound impressive, but you come down and you say, oh, console, and this is just console subscriptions. Oh, console is just 25% of the market, then all of a sudden 5% of that being subscriptions means it's 20% of the console market. So expanding rapidly. Okay, so to sum up what I've tried to talk about in the last 30 minutes, console has a very bright future, and even though this year it might be the sector that's declining, for the next 3 years, with the way these console cycles usually go, we forecast it to be the fastest growing segment, even faster than mobile, which for the past decade has been the fastest growing segment. So, what does this also mean? The boundaries of console are crumbling. These were once closed ecosystems, but they're opening up, and this is driven by live services, or arguably live services and subscription services is the result of these boundaries opening up. And this enables things like cross-platform, cross-play. Should make it easier if you develop a game or if you publish a game to publish across multiple platforms to expand your addressable market. So for the overall games industry, that is good news. Cross-media can revitalize, you can grow your addressable market either by doing cross-platform, staying within the game sphere, or expanding your franchise and your recognizability by going through other forms of entertainment, movies, series, but it can also be comics, books, you know what. And the last thing that I wanted to address here is about cloud gaming. Recent news with Stadia, of course, calling attention back to cloud gaming. Our take on cloud gaming definitely has a role to play. It has a future. It will not replace consoles. It will be additive, or it will be just a form of delivery, like a disk. We move from a disk to a download, and we can go from a download to streaming via the cloud. So there's definitely a future in cloud gaming, but we're still trying to find the business model for it. Anyway, that is the end of my presentation. Again, thank you for attending. Thank you for showing up this morning.